Canada is not supposed to be the place for something like this. Not a rural field in Ontario. Not a quiet stretch of farmland. Not a place where the biggest story should be weather, hockey, or traffic. And definitely not a place where police would discover 8 dead bikers stuffed inside 4 vehicles. But that is exactly what happened in April 2006. And the most disturbing part was not just the body count, it was who killed them. Because this was not a war between rival gangs. It was not the Hells Angels wiping out the Bandidos. It was not a random ambush from the outside. This was something colder, something more humiliating, a massacre carried out from within. 8 men were invited to what they thought was a biker meeting, a discussion, an internal dispute, maybe a patch issue, maybe a fight. Instead, they walked into a trap, and by sunrise, almost every one of them was dead. So how does a biker brotherhood turn into an execution chamber? And how does one man become the face of one of the most infamous mass murders in Canadian organized crime history? To answer that, you have to understand the man waiting on that farm. A man named Wayne Kellestine. Chapter 1. The Wrong Man in the Wrong World. Wayne Kellestine looked like the kind of man trouble naturally gathered around. He had spent decades drifting through Ontario's outlaw biker world, picking up enemies, criminal charges, and a reputation for being unpredictable, aggressive, and impossible to control. And in that world, unpredictability is dangerous, because biker clubs love to market themselves as chaos. But internally, they hate it. They want structure, hierarchy, discipline, obedience. Kellestine was not built for any of that. Over the years, he moved through different outlaw biker circles and built a name for himself, not as a diplomat, not as a mastermind, but as a volatile force. The kind of man who turned every slight into a personal war. And that mattered because by the early 2000s, the Canadian Bandidos were already unstable. This was never some polished criminal empire. It was a shaky chapter structure held together by ego, symbolism, and fear. Then came the split. One faction, led by Giovanni Musadere, was ordered to give up its Bandidos patches. Instead, the group refused and started calling itself the No Surrender Crew. That name was more than branding. It was a declaration. They were not going to bow, not to American leadership, not to rival bikers, and certainly not to men like Wayne Kellestine. And in outlaw biker culture, that kind of defiance doesn't just create tension, it creates targets. Because once a patch dispute becomes a public power struggle, somebody usually decides that humiliation is not enough. Somebody starts thinking about making an example, and Wayne Kellestine was exactly the kind of man to think that way, but he wasn't acting alone. And what happened next wasn't spontaneous, it was arranged. Chapter 2. The Farm. The farm was perfect for what they had in mind. Remote, private, familiar to the men setting the trap, and completely under their control. On the night of April 7, 2006, members of the No Surrender Crew were invited there under the pretense of an internal biker meeting. That is what makes this story so sinister. Not that violence happened. Violence was always part of that world. It is the setup. These men did not ride to the farm expecting to die. They rode there believing they were going to talk, maybe argue, maybe get threatened, maybe settle a club dispute. But the meeting was a lie from the start, because waiting on that farm were Wayne Kellestine, Michael Sandom, and others already prepared for violence. That changes everything. This was not a heated disagreement that spiraled out of control. It was not two sides showing up equally ready for war. It was a staged encounter where one side believed the rules of biker business still applied, and the other side had already decided the rules were over. And if that sounds like betrayal, that's because it was. But the betrayal gets even worse, because once the first shots were fired, this stopped being an ambush. It became something much darker. Chapter 3. The first shot changes everything. At some point after the No Surrender men arrived, the illusion collapsed. One of them, Luis Raposo, appears to have realized that something was wrong first, and then the gunfire started. Raposo was killed early. Others were wounded trying to escape. Panic took over. In just seconds, the entire meeting changed shape. One moment it was biker politics. The next it was survival. And that is the terrifying part of stories like this. How fast the script flips. How quickly men can go from brothers, allies, or internal rivals to prey. The men trapped on that farm now understood the truth. There would be no negotiation, no patch settlement, no disciplinary process. They had been brought there to be overpowered. And once that reality set in, their chances were almost gone. Because the killers had the location, they had the weapons, they had the numbers, and above all, they had already crossed the psychological line that most people never cross. They had already accepted murder as the outcome. But even then, the worst part of the night had not happened yet. Because if this had ended in one burst of gunfire, it would still be horrifying. Instead, it slowed down. And that is what makes this case unforgettable. Chapter 4. The Execution Line. After the initial chaos, some of the surviving men were no longer fighting. They were captives, held at gunpoint, controlled, waiting. And this is where the case stops looking like biker warfare and starts looking like industrialized killing. Because according to later court descriptions, the murders became what one judge called an execution assembly line. Think about that phrase. An assembly line, not rage, not panic, not confusion. A process, a sequence, a system where human beings were taken, one after another, and killed. That is not just violent, that is methodical. It means there was time to stop, time to think, time to back out, time to decide that maybe 8 murders on a farm was a line too far, but they kept going, one after another. By the time the night was over, 8 men were dead. Giovanni Musciadere, Jamie Flans, George Kriarakis, Luis Raposo, George Jessam, Paul Sinopoli, Frank Salerno, and Michael Trotta. 8 men tied to the Toronto Bandidos split. 8 men erased in a single night. And that kind of killing does something to the mythology of biker clubs. Because clubs like this love to project power, honor, brotherhood, code. But there is no honor in an execution line. There is only domination, only fear, only the truth hiding behind the patch. And the truth was this: the brotherhood had collapsed completely. Now all that was left was the cleanup. And cleanup is where killers usually start making mistakes. Chapter 5. The Bodies in the Cars. If the killers thought the hardest part was over, they were wrong. Because now they had a logistical problem. 8 corpses, a blood-soaked crime scene, multiple vehicles, and a farm that could become the center of one of the biggest murder investigations in Canadian history. So the bodies were loaded into cars and moved. By the morning of April 8th, police found 4 vehicles near Shedden, Ontario, containing the bodies of the victims. That discovery is why the case became known as the Shedden Massacre. But the real story had begun hours earlier, back on Kellestine's farm, and once police started pulling on that thread, the entire thing began to unravel. Because moving bodies does not erase a massacre, it usually just widens it. Cars leave trails, phones create timelines, weapons connect people, forensics preserve what panic tries to destroy, and mass killings are messy. No matter how tough, secretive, or disciplined criminals think they are, 8 murders create too much evidence, too many moving parts, too many witnesses, too many chances for somebody to crack. And eventually, that is exactly what happened. The case tightened. The farm drew scrutiny. The myth of the perfect biker cleanup disappeared. Now the men involved were no longer enforcers. They were suspects. And once the state fully locked onto them, the outlaw image started to crumble.